My friends, I am going to share a controversial opinion, a hot take, if you will. I'm not the biggest fan of winter. I don't like the colds. Wednesday was so cold. It was a little drizzly and wet out, just chilled me to the bone. And I saw a remarkable sight. Steve and Sharon were at Todd's house for our Wednesday Connect group, and they ride bicycles over to that. And I run from my car to his doorstep. I want nothing of it. Winter is not my favorite, even when I used to ski, which I don't do much anymore because I'm a klutz and I'm bad at it and I get hurt pretty easy. Even then, not the biggest fan. I like spring. I like fall because I could wear my sweatshirts and my jacket and feel cozy. I don't like wearing my sweatshirts and my jacket and going, I need to put on another layer and gloves and a scarf. No. And a lot of us have a hard time with winter. So if that happens to be you, I want you to know that you've got some company. You're not the only one. Now, the season of Advent is all about waiting. We are waiting. We are waiting for Christmas. We are waiting for a reality we live in and also anticipate more of, in a sense. And I think it's important for us to recognize that Advent takes place during the time of year that it does for those of us north of the equator. This is not accidental. Our faith predecessors also had a hard time with winter. Now, this might be hard to imagine, but perhaps even more so. Imagine living in the Middle East or in Europe during the winter months without the convenience of central heating, or even a fireplace for many. You got to huddle together for warmth. Winter can be rough. So it's not surprising that the early church decided to have Christmas so close to the winter solstice when we're going to be having our longest night service, right? Because we need these marks in the year. We need these marks in the winter that it's not going to be winter forever. The days are going to get longer. The warmth is going to come back. We need something to hold on to. We need that hope. We need to be able to cultivate some joy even in the cold of winter. And so it's not surprising that we see our pagan ancestors, because we have to remember, Christianity did not just arrive. It also incorporated traditions of not just the Jewish people, but also pagans. And so when they had the wisdom to have winter holidays, our predecessors were also like, you know what? We need some of that too. Let's hold on to that. We need some winter holiday. We need some joy in the middle of winter. We need an excuse to get together and be raucous. We need to have the opportunity to gather together and make some joyful noises. This is part of why I find it so silly that so many of us fail to acknowledge our pagan history along with our Jewish history and our Christian history. Because I think there's some great wisdom there. And I like that we've been able to keep this together. But for us, this time of year, we cling to this truth that we proclaim whenever we gather, that God is with us. Emmanuel. right? Christmas is coming. And so we wait, like an expecting couple, for a baby to be born. Interestingly enough, this is how the Gospel of Luke starts off. Now, we've been in the narrative lectionary. We spent months and months going through some of the themes of the Hebrew Bible. And if you were greatly studious and attentive, you're going to pick up some rhyming in our stories, okay? Because Luke likes to riff on stories that came before him, stories that he's familiar with. Now, when we say Luke, we don't mean Luke. We don't know who wrote the Gospel of Luke. But because it's language we're all familiar with and it's what our book is called, we're going to just call him Luke anyway. Okay? He also wrote the book of Acts. So these are one really large story. And this is just the beginning of it. We're going to be spending months and months in this. And so he starts us off by presenting us with this first chapter that is packed with pregnant goodness. And it's a musical. Now I'll get to that. So we have this couple that we meet, Zechariah and Elizabeth. And wouldn't you know it, they are part of the religious elites, the Sadducees. That doesn't necessarily mean they were greatly observant in their religiosity. It means that they were born into a segment of society who had the duty and the honor of looking after the temple. The temple represents the presence of God amongst us. And that's really great. But it also has some baggage. The Sadducees carry baggage with them. You see, they don't believe in the afterlife. This gets them into some hot water with some of the other religious groups of the Jewish people in Israel. But that's their view. They believe that all the rewards you receive happen to be in this life. If God likes you, for whatever reason, you get goodies now. But if God doesn't like you, you're not going to get any goodies. So you see those people who are suffering? They must have done some bad stuff. But you see those people who are doing great? Oh, God must really like them. That's the perspective of the Sadducees, and it comes out of the book of Deuteronomy. That doesn't, I don't want us thinking this is what everybody in Judaism at the time thought. This is one group. And I also want to point out, many of us still think and act like this today. So we can't be too shocked, right? Now, Elizabeth and Zechariah are noted for being particularly devout. They go the extra mile. They are righteous. Now, this word for righteous is also the same word for just. So this means that they do indeed care about the people around them, and they try to live accordingly to that care. But they've got a problem. They are old, and they have no kids. And that is just not right in this world at this time. In fact, we see that Elizabeth in particular feels greatly disgraced for it. That means she feels like God has treated her with a lack of kindness. Well, of course she thinks that. Look at the group she's a part of. Also, if you're an older couple, children are your retirement plan. I just want to point that out. Okay? So one day, Zechariah is chosen to go light incense in the temple. What an honor for him. He goes inside, people are outside praying, and he lights the incense, and ba-boom! Right next to the incense altar, the angel Gabriel appears to him. Now, we have this view of angels appearing, and it's all very oh, how sweet. And yet, almost every time that angels appear in Scripture, it's a terrifying situation. So we have Zechariah just trembling in terror at the sight of this angelic being in front of him next to the altar of incense. And so the angel says what angels almost always say when humans see them in their angelic forms. Hey, don't be freaked out. It's okay. She always fixes, whenever I'm freaked out. And he says to John, I'm spoiling things. He says to Zechariah, you are going to have a child that you're going to name John. John means God is gracious. John means God has treated you with kindness. And he tells him that this baby that he and his wife are going to have is going to pave the way for important work to be done, that people are going to be reconciled to one another and to God. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because we see a similar impossible pregnancy story with Abraham and Sarah in the book of Genesis. And we see another impossible pregnancy story with Samuel, the last judge, and the guy who goes on to anoint the first kings. So we have Luke riffing on these. Okay? Now, in the book of Genesis, when Sarah overhears an angel telling her husband that Sarah is going to give birth to a baby, she rolls on the floor with laughter. This is hilarious to her. Okay, whatever. And she is not punished for this. But Zechariah has the audacity to ask the question, hey, how can this be? And Gabriel says, you know what? Because of your doubts, you're not going to talk anymore. And this is supposed to be funny, and I wonder if it was a lot funnier to the original audience, because to me this feels kind of like a disproportionate response, But there's some wordplay happening in here. Because you did not listen to my words, you don't have words now, is basically the joke. There's some wordplay happening in there. Now, we don't know if this is a historic event. I lean towards this being a rhetorical event, but we don't know. If this is a historical event, maybe Zechariah was a particularly boisterous older man. And Elizabeth has put up with this for years. And now she gets to have 9 months of pregnancy with just blissful silence. We don't know. We don't know. So Zechariah goes home. Everybody is gobsmacked that he has had some sort of event happen. And this baby is filled, this embryo at this point is filled with the Spirit of God. Something that is also calling back to the Hebrew Bible, because Abraham's kids are said to have this special relationship with God. Samuel is a prophet and has the Spirit of God in him. One of the unique things that happen in the gospel stories are this bridge event, where it's not just something that one person has or a couple of people have, but everybody can participate in the Spirit of God. So John, this little embryo that hasn't even been born yet, already carries the Spirit of God within him. So much so that when Elizabeth encounters the unborn embryo Jesus, John does somersaults inside of Elizabeth, which leads her to also have a prophetic gift, and she proclaims how awesome this is. I don't know if that's how it would feel. I've never been pregnant. That sounds pretty uncomfortable for me. But it's an extraordinary, awesome event for her. And then we finally get to the point where John is born. And Elizabeth wants to name the baby John. God is kind. God is gracious. But the men who have come to circumcise John tell her, "No. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, you cannot name your baby John." Can you imagine? You deliver your child, you mothers and parents in the room, and you're like, "Hey, my child's name is going to be blah blah blah," and the doctors say, no, you can't name your baby that. So they tell her, "You're going to name the baby Zechariah because you don't have a John in the family." That's silly. I don't know how steamed Stephanie would have been if this happens, but I would have been pretty angry. Zechariah goes and he finds a tablet and he writes out the baby's name, John. And now that the men who performed the circumcision have finally seen that the father has said the baby's name is John, they go along with it. And they think this is pretty remarkable. And at that point, he finally has words again. And this is what leads us into one of our musical numbers in the book of John. So Jesus Christ Superstar wasn't the first to, have musicals as part of the Jesus story. And he riffs on this poetic part of the book of Isaiah that the people would have been familiar with. The people who know this story would be familiar with. "The way of peace they do not know, and there is no justice in their paths." This is from the 59th chapter of Isaiah. "Their roads they have made crooked. No one who walks in them knows peace. Therefore justice is far from us, and righteousness does not reach us. We wait for light, and lo, there is darkness, and for brightness, but we walk in gloom." So Zechariah riffs on this passage to declare the opposite, to declare hope. He sings of hope that his people will one day be liberated. Here we are, hundreds of years later. Isaiah's people are experiencing hardship, oppression at the hands of the Babylonians and then the Persians. And all these years later, centuries later, Zechariah's people are experiencing oppression at the hands of the Romans. And he says this is not going to be our reality forever. One day we will be liberated. Someday we will be saved. The forces of death will give way to abundant life. Hurt relationships will be mended and will be reconciled to one another. He declares that one day dawn is going to break through the night. And that is what Zechariah sees God doing through John the Baptist, his little baby boy. And this is how Luke wants us to get acquainted with the scheme of God in his story of Jesus. That the cold night will end and it won't be dark forever. That God is the dawn breaking through the foggy dimness of the nights we experience. What a powerful image. Now, as I mentioned before, I can't speak to the historicity of this. But I think this is a beautiful encapsulation of the work that Jesus was about, of the values that Jesus proclaimed, of the hope that Jesus tries to impart with those who listen to him. Reconciliation and repentance and justice and peace and fearful night giving way to hopeful light. Now, there have been times in my life where I just did not feel like joy was going to return. That dawn was going to break through my own dark nights of the soul. I've shared before that I got lost on a mountain once. The months and months after that, when I had to do some really intense work around my own mental health, were dim. I remember missing laughing. You know? I know I'm not the only one in this room who has had an experience like that. Maybe you didn't get lost on a mountain, but you've had your own long nights of the soul. Some of you may be in that season right now. And I want you to know, dawn will break through. It won't be like this forever. In fact, dawn comes every day. It's just sometimes we don't notice it, especially during the winter when it's gray outside. The sun comes up every single day. And this is one of the things that helped get me through my own night of the soul. Recognizing that the sun came yesterday in that relationship that I never thought would be reconciled. And yet it was. It came through today when somebody who didn't have shelter received a home. Maybe not everybody who needs it, but some. Some. Is that enough? No. But we're going to keep working for that dawn to break through for other people, aren't we? Just because we don't always recognize the sun when it's here doesn't mean it's not there. And just as Zechariah saw the dawn of God in his child, in the life that he would live, as well as that child's cousin Jesus, I see the dawn of God in my son, in my daughter, in my spouse. I see God dawning in all of you. I want to let you in on a little secret. I love getting coffee with people. I genuinely enjoy getting coffee with people. I love chit-chatting with all of you. And part of the reason for that is because I get to see the light in your own lives. So many of you have shared with me how meaningful it is for you. And I'm glad. It's also meaningful for me. When Stephanie was a part of the Quaker Church, they would say to each other that the light within them sees the light within other people. You know, they would recognize the light within Stephanie. This is an image of George Fox, the founder of Quakerism, although he never called it that. And it sounds similar to some other truths that are communicated in other religions, right? We are light to one another, even if we don't always feel particularly glowy. Now, by the time Luke was penning his gospel, the place where these events occurred was devastated. And I've wondered how he could write such beautiful things taking place in a world that was so devastated in the not so recent or not so distant past. Within his own lifetime, Jerusalem was razed to the ground. The temple was destroyed. And yet, he's talking about these beautiful realities taking place. But I suspect that he wrote about the sun breaking through the night because those early believers, including him, sought to follow a glowing path. They lived into the world that God desires before they could see that reality actualized. And instead of waiting for it to come, they lived into it as their current reality. This is what Jesus would talk about throughout his ministry. The kingdom of God is at hand. It's in your midst. It's nearby. It's here, now. The world that God desires. How can that be? Well, when we choose to live out and in the values of God. when we choose to live into mutual care and concern for one another, that is us shining our light. That is us living a life so abundant that our writers, like Luke, said it was the path of a life that is so full it overflows from this one into the world to come. I love that. I love that. So, my friends, whether your heart is brimming over with Christmas cheer, or you have the winter doldrums, I hope you know some taste of joy this Advent. And I hope that you can enjoy it wherever you find it. I hope you can celebrate it. I hope that you can find some comfort in it. My hope is that you find joy wherever you can, and my challenge is, if you can muster it, share that joy with others. Because I think a lot of us could use some light this time of year. And I think we're going to need it throughout the year to come.